Welcome to Fluorescene.
So hello and welcome to Fluorescene Show Season 1, Episode 14. I'm your host, Dr. Alan Glazier, and we've got a great show for you tonight as always. Don't forget to hit that red subscribe button below to ensure you get updates on new shows, new segments as they launch. This week in ODs on Facebook, a doc post about his psychic patient who, when asked if his vision changed since last year, gave the all too common and super annoying answer, "You tell me, doc," and compares and contrasts it to the TMI patient who, when asked a similar question, answers with, "Well, it all started in the summer of 1985. Too much info, too little info. Docs added, like when they blend every eye symptom they ever had into one story, some from when they were a kid. Or when they say, "Well, this one time my eye had this weird pain for a fraction of a second, doc. What could that be?" Or when a patient doesn't know what contact lenses they're wearing or doesn't let you neutralize their glasses because they're testing you to see how close you could get to what they had last time. That's always special. Another facepalm moment. Let me get this straight. You want me to tell you if you feel like your vision has changed in the past year? Then there are patients who go into such tremendous detail on a simple question, even informing you the exact day or time they lost their virginity. And reading these comments convinces me that optometric patients are, well, to be PC, special. A doc shared this photo. Yikes, ouch, and a whole lot of other expletives. The patient got a zipper caught on his eyelid. Not sure I took the class on how to treat this. Then again, I don't think there was an elective in haberdashery at NECO. I'm going to guess alcohol was involved, it was a Monday, or some company came out with a new technology for meibomian gland expression. It reminds me of a scene in Something About a Mary, but that was another body part. Now this was on a member's delivery from VSP, and they asked for interpretation of the green sticker. Suggestions included, obviously a warning that glasses will keep your eyes dry when it rains, or wear your safety glasses and have an eye wash station nearby, or maybe it's advice to shower with your glasses on instead of off. The most likely explanation, though, was that the sticker indicates the package was delivered by an alien spacecraft. And the winner, a pictorial instruction on how you refill the medicine in your glass. A member posts this photo of a scleral lens over an eye that underwent multiple RK surgeries over 30 years ago, followed by 2 LASIK surgeries many years later, and a full-thickness corneal transplant 5 years ago. In the photo, the 2 arrows in the center are pointing to the first donor interface of the transplanted cornea. The arrow at 4 o'clock is pointing to one of the many scarred RK cuts that can be seen, and the arrow at 8 is pointing to the edge of the scleral lens. This patient has no functional vision with his eye without correction. With the scleral lens seen here, the patient is 20/20 with comfortable all-day long vision. Great job, doc. We're really changing patients' lives with scleral and other specialty contact lenses. A doc posted this patient, a 63-year-old Asian female, did not know what happened or why her eye was like this, only knows she was born with it. Cool iris coloboma pic. The doc shared it. Thanks for sharing it. Amazing shot. A doc posts this picture of a 75-year-old Caucasian musician. Looks like the patient is headed for treble. Is that band retinopathy? Another doc suggested they give him bass down prism. Get it? Bass, treble? Sorry, I'm trying here. A doc wanted to know if the doc told him, "You'll be flat if you don't see sharp." Well, that's it for this week's ODs on Facebook update. Stay tuned because we've got a great show lined up for you. We interviewed Dr. Mark Dunbar, and even though the video didn't come through, unfortunately, he shares compelling insights into his career at Bascom Palmer. Also, enjoy the second installment of Dr. Jim Fanelli's Tuscan discussion, where he shares a primer on differentiating papilledema from disc edema. Don't forget to hit that red subscribe button also to share this video with your friends and colleagues. Now, kick back, pour yourself something, as long as it's not fluorescene, and enjoy tonight's Fluorescene show.
I'm here today with Dr. Mark Dunbar. Mark graduated from the Michigan College of Optometry at Ferris State University in 1986 and went on to complete a fellowship in ocular disease at the Omni Services of Lexington, Kentucky. He's been on staff at the University of Miami's Bascom Palmer Eye Institute for over 30 years. Currently, he serves as Director of Optometric Services, I believe. You can correct me if that's wrong. Dr. Dunbar is a fellow of the American Academy of Optometry and a founding member of the Optometric Glaucoma Society and the Optometric Retina Society. He's an adjunct faculty at Nova Southeastern University College of Optometry and my alma mater, the New England College of Optometry. Hoorah. He's recipient of the Springer Lecturer Award by the University of Alabama at Birmingham College of Optometry as well. He serves on the editorial board for Review of Optometry and Advanced Ocular Care Publications. He's served on several advisory committees, including that of the Academy, the Florida Optometric Formulary, the AOA Medical Eye Care Committee, the Florida Optometric Association Continuing Education Committee, and the AOA Diabetes Eye Care Project Team. He serves as an advisory to many industry companies and is on the Vision Expo Continuing Education Advisory Board. Dr. Dunbar has numerous peer-reviewed publications in retinal disease diagnosis and treatment and lectures all over the world. So I just want to welcome you, Mark, and thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. And I want to tell people that I met Mark when he reached out to me with an idea for ODs on Facebook to create the hashtag TFT, which stood for Tales from the Trenches. And the idea was to utilize the hashtag to identify posts that had particularly compelling clinical images, and then use the hashtag to easily find those posts and then drive conversation in a Vision Expo panel, which we did for several years. It was a lot of fun and really well received.
Yep.
And yeah, that was the famous Mark Dunbar's contribution to ODs on Facebook. Now, aside from his passion for ODs on Facebook, his depth and breadth of knowledge and experience are amazing. ODs have so much to learn from you, Mark, not just from your long tenure at arguably the top eye hospital in the world, but from your volumes of research, lectures, teaching, and publications. So thank you for all you bring to the profession.
Thank you, Alan. You make me sound way better than I really am. Anybody who knows me that...
I'll look for that check in the mail. You could use Venmo as well.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
you're a native Michiganer and you transplanted to Miami. Yeah. Do you make it back to the glove at all?
Rarely. I have some close friends who live up there, and unless, there's a significant event, and I hate to say such as a funeral or any of those type of events, I go up. My parents migrated to Pensacola, and I have an older brother who lives in Mississippi. So not a big reason to go back. And I wish it was more often because, as I said, we all have our high school friends that we're still close to, and many of mine live up that way, and I'm miss seeing them. So I wish I was closer. Miami is really at the other end of the United States. So even though we're Miami International Airport and you can get to almost anywhere, it's not always easy.
That's why they invented guy trips, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So at what point did you decide it was going to be optometry, and what led you to that decision?
Well, so interesting. When we were in high school, you had to write the prototypical term paper on what it is that you thought you wanted to do, and the one that they read, the example of how to do this was a friend of mine who was a couple of years ahead of me, Bobby Merrick, and Bob wrote one on optometry. And I thought, boy, that sounds kind of cool. And so that's what I did my term paper on when I was a junior in high school. And I thought, this would be just, living in a small town. I would coach the basketball team. I'd be involved in the community. And this just sounds great. And so when I went to Ferris, I had every expectation I probably would find something else, because which 17, 18-year-old, 19 or 20-year-old really knows what they want to do for the rest of their lives. So, but the more I looked at optometry, the more I just thought, boy, this just seems great. This is really what I wanted to do. And I was kind of one of those, back in the day, you could still get in after 2 years. And so I was really committed to, I'm going to become an optometrist. And I really put myself in a situation to be able to get in, even though, anybody who knows me or went to optometry school, I was, the typical, B, occasional A, a few C student. And so I still don't know how I got in as early as I did. I did terrible on board scores. I did terrible on, OCAT scores. So it was like, somebody was looking out for me, a higher power. So.
Well, you really turned into quite the slacker within the profession too. Top of your field, lecturing, publishing at Bascom. My God, tell us about your a day at work at Bascom. Tell us about your role there.
Well, so I see patients essentially 4 days a week, and it's evolved over the years. I do primary eye care, I think, just like everybody else. So though I love and have a passion for ocular disease, in the early days I worked a lot in the retina clinics, and of course have been written the retina quiz for many years. I was known as a retina person, but I do primary eye care, so I see a lot of vision plan patients who, just need a stronger add or a little more minus. I see a lot of patients who have glaucoma, a lot of patients with diabetes, just like everybody else, right? I see the cataract who needs cataract surgery. So I think it's a pretty prototypical primary care practice that does, a fair amount of medical, but also a lot of, I don't want to say optical. I mean, I am at a new satellite at Bascom Palmer where I'm even doing some kind of contact lenses, which anybody who knows me, I hadn't fit a contact lens in probably over 20 years. So I even do a little bit of that. So I think I relate pretty well to people that are, in the trenches doing primary eye care, because I think that's what my practice is.
Yeah. I always thought of you as a retina guy, but your publications, when I went through them, covered everything from the back of the eye to ice syndrome, orbital tumors in children. You've written on MRSA, infectious anterior segment diseases, even cost of prostaglandin analogs and dyslexia. So you really know your way around the whole eye. Even though you're known as a retina guy, what is that the part of the eye you're most comfortable in?
I like it all. It's interesting because in optometry we don't really have subspecialty, and so when you look at industry support, for example, anterior seg, dry eye, treating conjunctivitis, that was really when we were when there were meetings and things like that, it was really on the anterior seg side, followed by kind of glaucoma, and retina was always kind of the lost child. So I liked retina just because it was it was difficult. I think it requires a challenge, and I was lucky enough to be surrounded by great retina people. My mentors, even in optometry, were people who were just great clinicians. Hal Finley, Paula Jamian, those guys, they just knew anything that walked in the door, they knew what it was, and they were great at the retina. And I think we recognized coming out of optometry school, that's kind of an area of deficiency we all have. Seeing lattice degeneration or the mystery, there's something going on in the retina and you don't know what it is. And we've all kind of faced that experience. And it's better now in the era of imaging. But so it was to be around people who could provide those answers, and they were my mentors, and I wanted to really be like them. And so, retina was kind of where I kind of found my way. And as I said, from an industry support, when you looked at meetings, there weren't many opportunities to lecture and that, but I think that's kind of come around over the last several years with even industry recognizing optometry and retina and OCT.
Well, that's good. Phew, because I only prepared retina questions for you today.
Well,
I think one of the I prepared questions like I would want to know, and one of the things that I've heard, moving right into a couple clinical questions, is that the differences between Avastin and Lucentis and Eylea clinically are incremental and mostly boil down to the cost and the packaging. But 6 months or so ago, I think what is it, Beovu? It's a new one they approved.
Beovu, yeah.
How does that fit into the picture?
Well, I just spoke on this morning to a kind of a group of people who work for optometry in the federal level. So you're right. In macular degeneration, probably those three drugs, Lucentis, Avastin, and Eylea, there's probably not much difference between them. Though I think retinal specialists would agree Lucentis and Eylea, the more branded medications are better. And you don't really see that as much in AMD, but for example, in diabetes, you see it a lot more. So in diseases where VEGF expression is much higher, there's really a clear benefit between Lucentis and Genentech. So yes, cost becomes an issue. So you do see retinal specialists gravitating towards Avastin, but really Lucentis and Eylea actually do, I think, a much better job. And the downside of those treatments, of course, is patients having monthly injections, and the burden of treatment, every month for the first 3 months, and then you like to treat and extend, but many patients need to be treated every single month, and it's a huge burden. So along comes these new drugs like Beovu, which is Novartis's drug. And so the idea was that it would be just as good as Lucentis and Eylea, but it would last longer and it would result in less number of injections. And in fact, that really proved to be the case in the clinical trials, which led to FDA approval. So, boy, there was a lot of excitement and interest around it. Unfortunately, once retinal specialists started using it, and this started really about a year ago, they started reporting cases of severe inflammation and retinal vasculitis that really was almost blinding, almost like having an endophthalmitis patient come in. And so
Wow.
it really put the brakes on using that drug. And so it's been a year out. I think it now has a black box warning. Don't quote me on it, but it really a drug that had great potential and probably would have supplanted all the other drugs, ends up kind of falling by the wayside because, I think retinal specialists are afraid of taking the risk of using it.
Yeah, I mean, they've got stuff that works. You don't want to take that risk.
Yeah.
They've got to figure that out. Wow, that must be hard on the
Genentech has a new port delivery system. So think of putting a surgically like a little port, and they can just essentially kind of pour the drug in that gets time released. And that's kind of the next exciting area. It uses Lucentis because it's a Genentech product, but there's a lot of excitement around that.
That's great. It'll be great when we find something that can limit those number of injections. Staying in the back of the eye there, you've written a lot about occurrences at the plane of vitreoretinal separation, like VMT macular holes and epiretinal membranes. Can you tell viewers how you approach these conditions and when you think it's time for surgical care?
So, I think all of us are used to seeing those kind of conditions now that we're in the era of OCT, right? It used to require, Gass would talk about how difficult it was to see a stage 1 macular hole, and it all had to do with the ability to see the vitreous, which, you really aren't able to do on clinical exam. So along comes OCT, and boom, I think we were all seeing cases that, we never would have seen on clinical exam. We started recognizing it's more common than we ever thought it was. And so a lot of these cases, remember, vitreous sometimes will spontaneously detach on its own. And I've got a couple of cases that I always show in the lectures where that's happened. But we know that in some patients, the traction continues and they'll progress to a macular hole. So there's different thoughts. I've had retinal specialists that will wait until patients develop a full thickness macular hole. So even though there's a lot of traction on the retina, the thought is that even if they go on to develop a macular hole, the success of vitrectomy and repairing that hole is no greater than, if you treat it early versus wait till they develop the hole. And then I've had patients who are very symptomatic, and retinal specialists would treat them early just because they're very symptomatic. So I think, like a lot of things, symptoms really drive what we do for our patients. And if they're really symptomatic, then, I think you refer those patients on. And then, if they're doing okay, and you have an OCT, and many of us do now, I'm a champion of optometry. I think we keep those patients in our chair. We watch those patients until they actually need to be sent. And that's really what technology like OCT affords us the ability to do it. Not that we're a retinal specialist, so I don't want to make that claim, but I think it does put us on really more of a level playing field.
That's a soapbox that I stand on too. And interviewed Dr. Jim Fanelli recently, who again, that's a big thing with him. I agree with that. In that area of the eye, I know that sometimes they'll apply plasminogen or microplasmin treatments. Is that something that is still done regularly?
Not really. That's a drug that, again, seemed to make sense. It would cause really vitreous lysis, if you will, and would cause a spontaneous detachment of the vitreous. The problem is it didn't really work really well, and it was expensive. Yeah. I want to say it was like $4,000, and the success was, up to 40% if the conditions were right, for vitreomacular traction and developing a macular hole. But the reality is the success was much less. And again, as it really ultimately showed after market, is it was kind of toxic. So patients would have some toxicity, they would see yellow. And so I think because of the expense, because it didn't really work well, and because of the side effects, I really don't know anybody that's really using it anymore.
Interesting.
Yep.
One of the things I promised you when I asked you on here was that I wouldn't throw any hardballs at you, but I lied.
Okay.
It's not that hard, I'm teasing. Can you tell us about a time when you, Mark, were stumped and what happened?
Well, I get stumped all the time.
Just a particular time.
I don't know if anybody's doing. I just was today. On Fridays, I don't typically see patients, but we, in the era of COVID, we're doing a lot of these kind of rapid telehealth visits. And so I was seeing one this morning of an African American lady who's got just a lot of eyelid swelling. Only one eye, no pain, no tenderness, really no nothing. It started on Sunday, right? And so I didn't have the ability to examine her, but obviously the telehealth platforms are pretty good, and I felt like I got a pretty good look. But pseudotumor, wasn't a cellulitis or a preseptal. She didn't have a sty. She didn't have a Scheie, and she didn't admit to being bit by a bug. So, I think we all have patients that we look at we're just not really sure, And again, we have imaging technologies and things like that will help us. I have another lady who I've been following for years and years, and she's got this little macular change that's clearly visible on OCT that, she's 20/60, and I'm not sure why she has it. I don't know if it's just a little focal pigment epithelial detachment, but it's one of those you could send it to OCT Connect, the platform that Julie Rodman and Greg Caldwell have developed. I love when people post images and there's a forum to be able to show cases and talk about, which is why I always like the Tales from the Trench. That's my favorite thing about Facebook is I love it when people post cases and I like that, because you have such a great community, there's pretty good feedback. Some people become a little ridiculous with the responses, but I think, for a practitioner who's not sure and you post an image, it's, you can kind of filter through some of that, and I think you can get pretty good perspective, or just, on the OCT Connect page, you really learn a lot, from the cases that are provided. And of course, Julie and Greg do such a great job with it.
And it's great that, it's great you said that, because it's, the viewers like to know that the thought leaders get stumped, that the thought leaders are still always learning. I mean, we're all in this to learn, and that's a great thing about the profession is I always continue to learn.
I think that's a mistake when you feel like you know all the answers, or you feel like you have to fool people that you know all the answers. There's a saying, you're as good as you say you are until you say you're better than you are, right? I remember Gas all the time. It's like, I don't know what's going on, and here's probably one of the best in the world who didn't know. And I think that happens to all of us. So just admitting, I'm not sure, getting a second opinion or asking, or, those type of things.
What's your opinion on YAG vitreolysis?
It's not a good opinion. For people who have persistent floaters, I know retinal specialists are very cautious. They don't like to do it. And I know some people who've had it done, some successfully, some not successfully. It's interesting because just people can be really debilitated from floaters, and traditional vitrectomy surgeons didn't want to do because of the risk. Now that we're in the era of small gauge vitrectomy, those ports that they make are so small, almost self-sealing. I mean, if I had a floater, I think that would be where a floater that really bothered me. I would want to have kind of a vitrectomy. But even then, risk of retinal detachments, I guess, is high, and a lot of surgeons don't want to do it. And again, same thing with vitreolysis. A lot of surgeons, which one is it? Trying to hit it? Are you able to break it up? I haven't heard too much about it a lot lately. I think the more aggressive, surgeons in communities that are, trying to, be everything, do everything. And so they're doing it. Again, I don't know it's really successful, but I think it's really more a little bit of a higher risk.
It also drives, for those doctors, a lot of them, it drives non-insurance revenue. So, just
and that's it. Exactly right.
We've got two questions. I know you got a hard stop in a little bit. We got two questions from viewers that I want to read. I'm going to read them to you. One of them says, one of our viewers asked if you enjoy shopping for handbags with your wife.
I do not enjoy shopping for handbags with my wife. Somebody must know my wife.
Who does?
That can be very dangerous. Yeah. We were skiing with Murray and Ben out in one of the meetings that Murray and Leo do, and my daughter unfortunately ended up breaking her collarbone on the very first day of skiing, and so they were out and ended up shopping, and of course they came back with a Louis Vuitton bag, and I was not happy about it. So And there's been a few occasions like that. So yeah, if anybody knows my wife, you know that she can do some serious damage.
Yeah. Well, we got another
She's
one
pretty
here
good
that's
about
funny.
it, though,
I'm
but-
sorry these aren't clinical questions. I'm surprised, but
No, I don't
another viewer
mind.
wants
I'd
to
rather
know-
talk about just BS stuff.
Yeah,
I was
well,
hoping
this
to do more
viewer
of that than.
Oh, I'm sorry, I talked over you there. This viewer wants to know fish and chips or Michelin restaurants for you. I don't understand that. Maybe you can explain it.
I don't know that either. I'm more of a fish and chips, greasy spoon. You know, if anybody knows me, I'm a dive bar. My favorite bar in the whole world is Irish Kevin's down in Key West. If you've ever been down there, that's really just a great hole in the wall sing along. So I don't like smoky bars, but I like bars with burgers, fish and chips. Now, if somebody wants to pay for a Michelin, 4-star restaurant, I'm willing to go. But you get the the little food, things that like stuff you really wouldn't eat, and you leave those restaurants pretty hungry, and you really spend a lot of money. So give me a good dive bar.
Tell us about your beautiful family.
So yeah, I have 2 kids from a first marriage, Kristen and Trevor. They are in their mid-20s, and both of them they live in Indy. Well, Trevor lives in Ohio, Columbus. Kristen lives in Indianapolis. They're both really, and Kristen married to a great guy. They're good. Their mom did a great job raising them. They're smart. And then I have, from a second marriage to my wife Ileana, I have a 16 and a 14-year-old. So one is a junior in high school, one is a freshman in high school. So. And my wife is Cuban, so I've got great Cuban in-laws and a Cuban extended family, and that's probably one of the things I love the most. That being from Michigan and a smaller family, and my mom is German, my father was American. I mean, we had family, but it's not like Hispanics or Italians, for example, where everything is a let's get together and celebrate and have fun. So I was really lucky enough to meet my wife and have great kids and have a great family that we're always cooking. People are coming over. There's always when my older kids come down. There's always a party at our house. There's always people there. We're always cooking. We're always having fun, and I think that's great.
Yeah, it's nice, and it's very meaningful as well. You left out talking about your golden doodle. So tell everyone how awesome
Molly.
golden doodles. Yeah,
I have Molly she's actually a standard poodle, so she looks just like yours. I mean, they would be almost identical. So no, she's just like yours. She's high energy, the sweetest, smartest, lovable dog. She's just she sleeps at the end of our bed. She loves the kids. She's just great. So yeah, she is a key part of our family. And always I posted more. I don't post a lot on Facebook. I wish I did. I'm still a little intimidated by the platform, but I would you probably see Molly if you look at my wife's posts and whatnot.
Well, some people like you have better things to do than me. Does Molly always face the door when she sleeps at the foot of the bed? Because that's a big thing with ours. He's never not facing the door.
She kind of curls up. Yeah, I think she is faced towards the end of the bed.
All right, well, listen, I know you have a hard stop, and I just want to tell you, our viewers are going to love this. Thank you for all the information you shared, and thank you for everything you bring to optometry. I'm glad to. Yeah,
I'd love to do it again and talk about other things besides. And by the way, I've worn a tie 4 times since March, so this was not. I'm usually, especially on Fridays, I'm a little dressed down. I've got a recording that we're doing after this for an NEI thing on macular degeneration, and then again, I spoke to Andy's group this morning, so I figured let me just put on a tie and
you look marvelous.
That's not usually me in the era of COVID. We are now like surgical scrubs and dressed down just like everybody else. So.
Well, we get it, and I'm definitely going to have you back. That's a no-brainer. So
I appreciate it.
Wait for that invitation, and again, go on to your other thing. But I look forward to catching up with you again. Okay, and we'll talk soon. Oh, right. Congrats on Vision Expo in Orlando this year. We just got that.
Yeah, they made that announcement today, so I hope everybody comes. I'm going to miss New York City because I love. Going to the Big Apple, but I think Orlando is going to be great. They've got a wonderful convention, center headquarters, and obviously easy to fly in, fly out. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So make sure you come. It'll be maybe the first meeting. I know Seco may be having theirs in Atlanta. That's still on, but after Seco, I think it'll be us, and I think I think everybody's ready, right? We want to get together. We want to, shake hands, give hugs, catch up, have some nice drinks and meals together, and I'm looking forward to doing that.
Yeah, we'll do it responsibly. Most of us will have our shot, so I'm psyched for that too. We'll make plans there to go for fish and chips. How's that sound?
All right, Alan, that sounds good.
All right, Mark. Good seeing you. Take care.
Take care, buddy. Bye, everybody.
In this week's Fluorescene news, Retinal news, a plan to manufacture an artificial retina is taking things to the next level. 260 miles above Earth, that is. LamdaVision, the biotech firm that developed the artificial retina, is exploring optimizing production of the artificial retina in space. In a series of missions to the International Space Station, the company will test whether microgravity on the station provides just the right conditions for constructing the multi-layered protein-based artificial retina. LamdaVision receives a $5 million commercialization award from NASA. In AMD news, using laboratory-grown roundworms as well as human and mouse eye tissue, University of Maryland School of Medicine researchers have identified a new potential mechanism for age-related macular degeneration. The researchers say that the findings suggest a new and distinct cause that is different from the previous model of a problematic immune system, showing that the structural organization of the eye's light-detecting cells may be affected by the disease. Their discovery was published on April 12th in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Findings suggest that complement factor H plays a role in maintaining the organization of photoreceptor cilia, and this process may be defective in age-related macular degeneration. In more AMD news, the first of an expected 38 patients suffering from dry age-related macular degeneration has received an experimental retinal implant in a new clinical trial. Pixium Vision, the French company behind the Prima implant, reported compelling results from a trial in France showing for the first time that the level of central vision restored by the implant combined well with patients' remaining peripheral vision. All 4 patients showed a visual acuity exceeding 2100. While the trial confirmed the safety and stability of the implants over a 24 to 30-month follow-up period. In dry eye news, Bausch Lomb announced statistically significant top-line data from the first Phase 3 trial evaluating the investigational drug Novo-3, or perfluorohexyloctane, as a first-in-class eye drop with a novel mechanism of action to treat the signs and symptoms of dry eye disease associated with meibomian gland dysfunction. The GOBI trial, as it's called, also met all of its secondary endpoints, showing statistically significant improvements in both the signs and symptoms of dry eye disease associated with MGD that were studied. In more dry eye news, researchers evaluated the association of children's daily electronic screen use with severe meibomian gland atrophy. They concluded children's excessive electronic screen use is associated with severe meibomian gland atrophy. Further research is needed to establish formal electronic screen use limits based on meibography grade and evaluate correlation of autoimmune disease biomarker positivity in children with severe meibomian gland atrophy. In gene therapy news, according to a paper published in Nature Medicine, a team of researchers at Penn Medicine's Scheie Eye Institute developed an experimental RNA therapy for patients diagnosed with a common form of Leber congenital amaurosis. The team's experimental therapy, called Fluorescene, increases levels of the functional version of a protein that a genetic mutation renders non-functional in patients with the disorder. The treatment is administered by injection directly into the patient's eye. In 2019, the team published results of an earlier trial exploring the efficacy of the treatment in reducing visual impairment in Leber's patients. They found that 3 months after the first injection, half of the patients showed improvements in visual acuity. In glaucoma news, in a recent study, researchers sought to compare the 10-year clinical outcomes of eyes with acute primary angle closure who were randomly assigned to either early phacoemulsification or laser peripheral iridotomy, as compared with acute primary angle closure who eyes that had initial laser peripheral iridotomies. Early phaco needed less medication, had less peripheral anterior synechiae, had a lower incidence of intraocular pressure elevation, and had a lower incidence of blindness at 10 years. In business news, Johnson Vision and Menicon are partnering to bring forward a novel portfolio of products and services to manage the progression of myopia in children, according to a news release. Menicon is set to manufacture therapeutic contact lenses designed to help manage the progression of myopia in children, while J&J Vision will be responsible for expanding the availability of the lenses around the world. In keratoconus news, genes involved in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome appear to play a role in keratoconus. This finding from a recent study is the first to demonstrate shared genetic variations between the two disorders, although their association has been suggested before. The study was published in the European Journal of Human Genetics. The researchers discovered significant associations between keratoconus and variants of keratoconus in several Ehlers-Danlos syndrome-associated genes. And in more keratoconus news, researchers set out to analyze the association between keratoconus and body mass index among adolescents. The study, a population-based cross-sectional study of 500,000 adolescents, provides strong evidence regarding the independent association between BMI and keratoconus. Overweight and obese adolescents have higher odds of having keratoconus compared with normal weight adolescents. BMI should be considered a risk factor for keratoconus, and further research should elucidate how obesity is involved in the progress of keratoconus. And that's all for this week's Eyecare News. Stay tuned for more of the Fluorescene Show.
All right, today we welcome Dr. David Kading. Dr. Kading grew up in South Dakota, and he owns a private practice in Seattle, Washington. Dr. Kading graduated from Pacific University College of Optometry before being accepted to their prestigious cornea and contact lens residency. While a resident, he was chief of the contact lens department at the Portland VA Medical Center. Dr. Kading is active in various dry eye and contact lens research. He's a consultant and key opinion leader for several eye care manufacturers as well. He's written hundreds of articles and given hundreds of lectures nationally and internationally. Also, he's a fellow in the American Academy of Optometry and active on committees, as is responsible for forming the Anterior Segment Special Interest Group of the Academy. He's also the only optometrist in the state of Washington to have earned fellowship status in the Contact Lens Society of America. Impressive. Dr. Kading hosts a residency for optometrists at his office, Specialty Eye Care Group. He's co-owner of Optometric Insights, an organization that helps emerging optometrists transition into the practice of their dreams, as well as educating clinicians in novel and unique ways to diagnose and treat patients. He has a regular column in Contact Lens Spectrum, Contact Lens Today, and a digital video series called Clinical Insights, and that's on iTube OD. Welcome, Dr. Kading.
Thank you, Alan. It's an honor to get to be on the Fluorescene.
I have one question about that bio. Emerging optometrist, it brings to mind an image of an OD crawling out of an egg.
Yeah. Well, our audience there within Optometric Insights is the -4 before graduation to about 10, 15 years after graduation. So it's kind of difficult to, call our tribe something other than emerging and, entering into the field of optometry. So
I'm going to give you a hard...
You're saying from an egg.
Well, I'm going to give you a hard time on any chance I get today.
Yeah, that's right. That's good.
This is a good point, a good place for us to jump off and tell us about your emergence, but try not to cluck. But, your emergence into optometry. What came first, the OD or the egg? All right, that's enough egg jokes.
Yeah. So, like everybody, I kind of had this interest in helping people. Later on, I kind of discovered my purpose of existence is to enrich people's lives so they could succeed to their greatest opportunity. And you'll hear that kind of as we kind of talk about the different areas that I'm involved in. And wanted to go into medicine, wanted to have, an idea of what that was. And really, it kind of came down to a balance of my family life and realized that optometry was the perfect thing. I thought I was going to be a pediatric optometrist or potentially just in primary care. I fell in love with contact lenses in school, decided to do a residency. In and amongst this time, I had another optometry student catch my eye, so to speak. And we ended up married in our 4th year, and she did her residency in binocular vision and pediatrics at the same time I did. and we emerged up to Seattle area, which is closer to her family, and bought our first practice in 2007. So that's how we kind of got into it.
That's a great story. Great story. You ended up in a great part of the country, and you've really not turned yourself from a practice owner into a thought leader and a legend in the industry. You write so much. I think over 100, almost 200 articles from what I could see. And I wanted to start by talking about one article I saw online that you wrote with our friend Mile Bruhick, and it was titled "Embrace the Oddballs." And what were you feeling when you came up with that name? And tell us what it means, and tell me about a time when you embraced an oddball, and it can't be during this interview.
Yeah, I think that we learn the most from things that are not normal. Yoda, to paraphrase the great philosopher Yoda, it's through failure that we learn the most. And when we fall down, and the odd things, I think are by far the areas that we grow, and the oddballs in our practice, whether a binocular vision patient, whether it's a multifocal contact lens, or just this weird dry eye patient, it really kind of fits in. And so we look for those types of opportunities. As a residency host, we are looking to teach our residents stuff that you're not going to see in normal practice. And, about 50 to 70% of my practice, depending on the day, is a referral based. We get patients with all different sorts of things, and they tend to be the oddballs, the ones that, other docs aren't ready to take on. And some practices, can refer those out, and that's great to have those referral centers, but sometimes you can't. And embracing those are great opportunities to learn. And those are the ones that we talk about in continuing education courses as the oddballs, right? So we love to embrace the oddballs, and I think that was the premise of that article.
Yeah, the oddball cases, and then there's the oddball patients, and I assume the oddball patient with the most oddball case would be right up your alley.
Yes, yes, it would be. Many of those people, to that end, sometimes people with different personalities, they tend to really have a hard time in eye care or in any medicine, because people don't know how to figure out how to communicate with them, right? And they've had a hard time embracing what's going on. So cracking that egg is just as important as cracking what's going on with them. There are studies that are out there, say in the keratoconus world, and I think every specialty would have this, but in keratoconus, there is a separate personality type that's documented in the literature that people that keratoconus have, and they're maybe a little harder to deal with. Was it, to our analogy, the chicken or the egg that kind of came up with it? Was it that their personality started and then they ended up having keratoconus, or did their keratoconus help them develop this oddball personality, so to speak?
It's a syndrome. It's a syndrome. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think I read about that, and it's definitely true. In all these years, I can think about some of the most challenging patients, were more personality than pathology. But yeah, when they come together, they really appreciate you, and you have a patient for life. That's
right.
That is one way I'm sure you set yourself apart, and you've been a cheerleader for optometrists setting themselves apart. Talk a little bit about the importance of that in building your practice, and how people can use that strategy to grow faster and such.
Yeah. Well, in today's optometry practices, we all seem to have some sort of specialty of some sort. To give you some background, my wife and I, we bought our practice in December 2007. And by the end of 2009, so essentially 2 years later, we doubled the revenue of the practice, and moving from a 4-doctor day practice, that was a single doctor, to both of us, we were nearly close to being full-time for the two of us. And the reason we did, and all along, we didn't do any more eye exams than he had done. So what we did is, we had better practice management, but maybe more importantly is we grew the specialty within our practice in a very quick time. The binocular vision and pediatrics for her, dry eye and contact lenses for me. And I'm still a primary care practitioner, right? I see -2 myopes just like everybody else who are standard, spherical soft contact lens fits, whatever it is, just like everybody else. But we've gone out to the community and said, hey, if there's challenging patients that have, you name it, any specialty, to kind of set yourself apart, hey, we deal with, this fancy pair of glasses that deals with people who have vertical prism and these sort of issues, or the glaucomas or the retinal disease, whatever it is. We like dealing with that here. Love to see that. And then ask your colleague, hey, what is it that you like to see? Maybe those are the patients that give you sweaty hands, and gives us an opportunity to become a specialty in what we like, but also to become a good colleague and refer patients and to receive those referrals. So I am a champion of us as a community of optometrists finding a specialty within what we like to do, and then finding the things that we don't like to do, because you're not going to be as good at them. You're not going to take care of those patients as well. And there is somebody who could do it better than you. So see if there's somebody in your community that you could refer to.
It's really rewarding to have a specialty as well, because again, you stand out. And people who have sought that care and can't find it elsewhere, they become not only part of your practice, but part of your life. You build lifelong friendships with some of them as well. So, and that all comes together in that family, having a family practice type feel. It sounds like you really have built a family practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by and large, my wife kind of brings them in. We a couple of years ago, we started working with the local hospital, and started doing these parent baby classes for newborns. At 3 or 6 months, my wife would go in and lecture about infancy eye exams. Wow. And we looked back over the years and we realized that those free infancy eye exams, which we would do over 100 of them a year, free infancy eye exams, they were one of the best ways to grow our practice. And, those parents would then be like, hey, can I come see you? And we're like, well, okay. The parents would then come see us, and then the grandparents would come see us. And, I would grow my contact lens patient base from that. And, it started with the pediatrics, and it just kind of has grown into the entire family. And it's been really, really rewarding. It's been a lot of fun.
That's really important for the young ODs watching this, because, well, you've been a real great role model for young ODs through optometric insights and elsewhere. But those kind of, I hate to use the old world pearls of knowledge, are important. After going through the process of student to real doctor, student doctor, real doctor, and subsequently having wind at my back with during that transition, I would have been further ahead in my career faster if I had advice like that. So let's give some advice to students on what they should think about and prepare for that transition. And once they're in practice, things like that help them build. It's just such valuable information that you don't get anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, Optometric Insights, we go out and we talk to students all the time. Pre-COVID, we were in the schools. In COVID, we've been doing virtual programs all the time. We're talking to, hundreds and thousands of students every single year about the importance of accelerating your success. That's what we're all about. So what do we need to do today to make whatever success is going to be later happen sooner? And how can we speed that up? One of the things, and we always say this to students, is the first and potentially most important thing for you to do is know where you're going to practice. And the reason we say that is because once you know where you're going to be, you can start developing some roots. Even as a first, second, third year optometry student, you can start laying a foundation, getting involved in local societies, start talking to doctors that are in the community who could potentially find you the job of your dreams. So we really talk about that as the first step that we have. And making those connections. I mean, Alan, you and I both know we wouldn't be where we are at with our practice or with our, outside of the practice optometry success had it not been for the relationships that we have. So it's so important to start developing those very, very early. And I look at the students who are crushing it as practitioners now. I look back at what they were doing in their third and fourth year, and they were starting to form relationships. So knowing where and then knowing what you want to do so that you can start forming that really accelerates the success, probably more than anything, of what we suggest people do while they're in school. Then after school, there's after school programs. There's obviously plenty of them that we could kind of talk about, and those success stories that we've heard over the years as well.
Right. I think a great tool for that is LinkedIn, because during school, if you know where you want to be, and I 100% agree, when you know where you want to be and you're sure, the earlier you can decide that, the better off you're going to be. You're the more stable and secure, and the faster you'll grow. And LinkedIn is a great place to gradually just send requests to people, and you don't have to inundate them with stuff or even connect with them right away. Just build a little network on LinkedIn of doctors that are in that area. What happens is they see your name. It's like marketing. Once you see something several times, you get familiar to some level with it. And then over time, tell them who you are. Don't ask for anything. It's not time to ask yet. Build those relationships online with that professional tool. And then when you're back for a break, say, hey, doc, would you mind if I come have lunch with you or visit your practice? Because I can tell you that there are several people who have done that over the years, several students who've done that when I was practicing, and I know them. And then when I get a CV or a resume of somebody who wants to move to the area after, and I've never met them, I'm definitely leaning towards the people I already know.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's happened time and time again that people come up to me and they're talking with me at conferences, and, I see them at Washington events, and, when it comes time for them to move up to the area, it's very easy for me to make a recommendation to another doctor who has a job open, or to talk with them about what's happening in our practice, versus those random CVs and those random letters of the person graduating a month from now, and they're looking to move to the area and they want to know if they can have a job. Right. Exactly. So, to your point, absolutely, I feel the same way.
And you do this all through the organization, Optometric Insights. Let's take a step back. Tell us about the genesis of the organization, and what are you all working on now? I know you're always pushing the envelope.
Yeah. Well, Optometric Insights formed, Mila Brujic and I. We were both lecturing all over the East Coast for him and the West Coast for me. And somebody at Alcon recognized that we were about the same age and doing the same thing. And at one of these conferences, they said, hey, I want to take the two of you out to dinner. And it was kind of like this blind date with somebody there chaperoning. The two of us were getting to know each other. And then this industry person was there to kind of make the connection, who knew us both. It was pretty funny when we look back at that. And then over the years, I would be doing conferences, I would be doing lectures, and, he and I just would talk on the phone, and we would chit chat with each other about things. And after a couple of years of doing that, we both mentioned that one of the most enjoyable things that we were doing is how much we were talking in the schools, and how much we were connecting with students and talking with them about mistakes that we had made. We were really encouraging people to consider private practice, but if they weren't, we wanted to know what they were intending to do, what their plan was. And it just kind of came about that we were really talking about some similar sort of things. And there was about 3 or 4 different companies that were trying to find a way to support programs like he and I were doing. And so we went to those industry groups and just said, hey, if we formed an organization, went out to all these schools, would you help support it? So the program is supported by industry, who has an interest in promoting practices and interest in promoting the profession, which both you and I know is a huge thing to put your money, because there's no immediate return on investment. So, those industry folks that have done that, it's just a huge win for them in the long term. And, we've really appreciated that. So the genesis started that we just continued to start going into optometry schools. We started an online community, outside of ODs on Facebook. From a community standpoint, I don't know, I think we're probably number 2 or 3 outside of ODs on Facebook. And it's not that there's competition. It's just like the synergy that we have with ODs on Facebook. But, we've got thousands of people that are following us on social media, both students, but also the people that are out for the last 5 to 10 years. And we're just trying to connect with them on how to accelerate their success. No student or no doctor ever pays us anything for what we do. We're industry supported so that they know, that it's not that we're trying to charge the student or OD for anything. And just over the years, it's just grown. And, I don't think either one of us imagined it would ever get as big or be nearly this fun. But we were really enjoying it and what we've accomplished over the years.
So what are you working on now?
Yeah, well, you alluded to in your intro about a video series that we did, which was originally hosted on iTube OD, and iTube OD by and large has gone away. iTube still exists, and it's a great place for video that is happening in eye care. But we owned the rights to our clinical insights, and so we have gone and republished all of them in our YouTube and our Facebook page. 80 episodes in total. We just look back how we made all of those 80 episodes and the amount of time. And this started probably 5 years ago that we were really doing this. And that was really early days of video, but it really caught on. And they were intended to be 2 to 5 minute long clinical insights, little pearls of how to treat dry eye, how to treat, whatever it was. And that video series has now come to a conclusion, at least as far as what we've been publishing. And so now we're doing something somewhat similar in a podcast, but also in a video scenario where we're publishing about 8 to 15 minute discussions with our optometric colleagues who Mila and I respect. We're having an industry corner around things. We're having an area that is, clinically focused and then a practice management focus. And the podcast sort of thing, it's called the OI Show because it's not just podcast. It's going to also be on YouTube and Facebook video is all intended to just give quick tidbits of things to do in practice or clinically. And it's launching March 1st, 2021. So if you're watching this before that, you'll know to look out for it. And if it's after that, you can go out and seek it through our social media or through the Apple or Android podcast.
That's exciting. That sounds like a lot of work, but it's going to add a lot of value to.
I don't know if it's as much work as you've put in on the Fluorescene. I mean, this is a pretty high production thing, my man.
It's about the content. You can make it as beautiful and pretty as you want, but unless you deliver good stuff, right? We both have similar goals because we both want to add value to the industry, and I just love the fact what you guys do for the young OD. Now, you told us about practicing with your wife. Tell us about the rest of your family.
Yeah, so I have 3 daughters. They are 4, 7, and 9 years old. They are just, the joy of my life. I think I was intended to be a father to girls. I thought, I'm a hunter and I like to shoot guns and I like to do all these things that are perceptively, historically very manly things. And, they don't have to be. My girls have been really enjoying getting involved in those sort of things. It's kind of taken down these gender stereotypes with my girls being excited and interested. We go camping. We enjoyed doing that a lot last year when we were, isolating away from people. Camping really became something that we did as a family. It was a lot of fun. And there's great places to do that in Washington State. Like you said, I'm originally from South Dakota, so we do get out to South Dakota and enjoy the beauty of the outdoors there as well. And my girls are doing little things like gymnastics, and they go to a school that is very liberal arts as opposed to a STEM school. So they come home and they've memorized these long Emily Dickinson's poems and so forth, things that I would never sit down and take the time to even read because they're so long. And my daughters have them memorized. It's just super impressive. Obviously, they're much more like their mother than like their father.
we forget how how great your mind is when you're young.
Yeah.
I mean, I have two boys, and just the things they learn and they talk about and they tell me, and memorization and talents and skills. Where did all mine go? Was I ever like that? I don't even remember. But yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I know that's special. I wish I had a daughter, but it didn't happen for me. So I'll wait for I'm counting on having a granddaughter, and they know that. That's great. And the hiking and the camping is great. I know you also bike and you're a triathlete. What else? What else don't you do?
Well, I've taken just a little sabbatical, maybe permanent sabbatical from the triathlete world. I had gone through a couple of injuries that required surgery. And so my doctor asked me a couple of years ago, let's ask your 80-year-old self if that's the thing you should be doing right now. So, we're reevaluating the physical aspects of what we're going to be involved in, and maybe considering a couple others after I am fully recovered from, I just had shoulder surgery. So when we kind of get recovered from everything, but, my daughters are super excited to get into rock climbing. They've all expressed interest in doing that. So that's something I did when I was younger. So potentially that, and then I do a lot of shooting and go to the range, and it's really fun to do precision shooting with guns. I think that's probably something that is I'm most involved in is target shooting, and that's takes an incredible amount of patience, calmness, centering yourself. And some of my friends are pretty involved in archery and target shooting with archery, and they're excited to get back indoors to do that sometime soon. So those are things that I've kind of been involved in. And I also, and this has been a fun COVID thing, am pretty involved in woodworking and building furniture and doing that sort of thing. So those are kind of my hobbies that I think a lot of people outside of Eyecare don't know about.
Well, I think we have the same doctor, because I had that same talk about my knees from running, and I don't even have a knee problem. He's like, I think you better move to the elliptical. I'm like, why, doc? Because when you're 80, we're at that point. I mean, you're younger than me, but, it was a smart move. And I'm a sharpshooter, so I appreciate that calmness and that you have to put into that kind of precision. It's something that's a big part of my life also. Did not know that. And woodworking. I know my way around my home shop too. Very cool.
There you go.
We'll have to talk more about that on other people's time. But listen, for now, we're going to wrap it up. And I want to tell you that I'm very appreciative of you being here today. And I'm appreciative of what you bring to the industry. And keep doing it, because it's fantastic. And I look forward to a time where we can hang in person. And I do want to ask you one thing. Can we have you back on the show where we'll talk clinical and we'll really dig down on some of the interesting cases and things you talk about in your lectures?
Yeah, buddy, I'd love that. I'd be excited to come back anytime. Awesome. Absolutely.
Well, I will put you on the agenda for a repeat sometime in the next 6 months or so. In the meantime, let's keep in touch and be safe and enjoy that beautiful family of yours, okay?
Thanks, buddy. Thanks.
All right, man.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Ciao tutti. Jim Fanelli here, Wilmington, North Carolina, with another edition of CE in Italy and Europe's Tuscan discussion. Today, we're going to be discussing a clinical conundrum that we see fairly regularly in clinic, and that is one of the patient who presents with a swollen disc. And the question that we have is this papilledema, or is this, in fact, something like disc drusen? Now, the differentials here are numerous, and I'm going to limit this particular discussion to simply papilledema versus optic disc drusen, because there's a big difference between optic disc drusen, which we know is a situation where we monitor the patient versus papilledema, where there is vision and life-threatening issues at hand. So first of all, the difference between disc edema and papilledema, we need to discuss that first. Technically, and we need to get this down straight, the definition of papilledema means swelling of the optic nerve related to increased intracranial pressure. Whereas the term disc edema means that there is swelling to the disc that may be due to an optic neuropathy, it may be due to diabetic papillitis, but it is due to a condition other than increased intracranial pressure. So papilledema is reserved for instances where there is disc edema, and it's usually bilateral, that is associated with increased intracranial pressure. In the early stages of disc edema, secondary to increased intracranial pressure, it has some of the similar signs clinically that optic disc drusen have, especially if optic disc drusen are in fact buried. But the key here is what we can see, for example, on MR findings. MR findings give us a pretty good indication of what we're going to see in our clinic when we utilize OCT technology. And for the most part, since OCT technology is readily available for all of us, we have that technology in our office, and we can use some of the clinical differences in OCT images between papilledema and optic disc drusen to guide us as to which of those two diagnoses we actually have. So if we take a look at an MR image of a patient with increased intracranial pressure, we know that increased intracranial pressure can be caused by a variety of issues. This could be vascular, it could be venous sinus thrombosis, it could be a subarachnoid hemorrhage, subarachnoid leak. But the common denominator is that the pressure in the subarachnoid space increases. And that increase in cerebral spinal fluid pressure in the subarachnoid space is transferred along the subarachnoid space surrounding the optic nerve. Remember, the optic nerve is characterized by the neural tissue centrally, but in the orbit there is surrounding the optic nerve. If my finger is the optic nerve, there's an optic nerve sheath, and around that sheath lies the cerebrospinal fluid. So when cerebrospinal fluid pressure is elevated, the sheath does not have the opportunity to expand. What happens is the pressure in that subarachnoid space begins to compress the optic nerve fibers in the orbit. That also tends to push the optic nerve flat up against the back of the eye. So some of the findings that we're going to see in an MR image is going to be distension and swelling and compression of the optic nerve and the optic nerve sheath. But we're also going to see flattening of the posterior sclera because of movement forward of the optic nerve in this area. Now, when we have increased intracranial pressure, as a result of the compression of the optic nerve, we're going to disrupt axoplasmic flow. And that axoplasmic flow will result in a disruption of both the structure, i.e. papilledema that we see when we look in fundoscopically, and also dysfunction of the optic nerve. In other words, visual field defects, vision loss, etc. So this issue of axoplasmic flow is directly related to the compression of the optic nerve behind the globe when intracranial pressure is elevated. Okay, so what does that look like when we look at the eye fundoscopically? Well, certainly we're going to see elevated disc margins, and that this can look very chunky, very full. But in the case of buried disc drusen, it can look very similar, and therein lies the clinical conundrum that we have. Does this patient have disc drusen, or does this patient have papilledema that needs to be urgently scanned? Our OCTs invariably will help us to make that differentiating point. Again, in the context of papilledema, we have a situation where increased intracranial pressure is compressing the axons. The axonal flow becomes stagnant, and we get both cytotoxic and vasogenic edema due to this compression. But when we look at these optic nerves from an OCT perspective, we're going to see a couple of things that help us to differentiate this from optic disc drusen. Number one, because the cerebrospinal fluid and intracranial pressure is elevated and is pushing on the back of the globe, we're going to see forward bowing of the RPE Brooks membrane complex, especially nasally, when we look at these images on OCT. Invariably, and there are exceptions to every rule, but invariably in papilledema, we're going to preserve some of the optic cup. Now, as papilledema progresses through the several Friesen stages, especially when it gets very, very significant, we can lose certainly the optic cup. But in early to moderate papilledema, the optic cup is going to be preserved. So we're going to see on OCT this forward bowing, and in fact, if this is the nasal aspect of the disc, we're going to see the nasal aspect of the disc somewhat be bowed forward. Usually, in a healthy eye, the posterior segment is going to have uniformity between Brooks membrane and RPE complex on the left nasal and temporal side of the nerve. So there's not going to be this disparity. That disparity occurs in about 2/3 of the patient, but not 100% of the patient with papilledema. Okay, so we're going to have that bowing. We're going to have preservation of the optic cup. The way that we need to see this on OCT technology is not using a perioptic RNFL circle scan. Think about it. If here is the optic nerve, and the optic nerve has some swelling to the neuroretinal rim here, our perioptic RNFL circle scan is going to be well outside of that area, and our perioptic RNFL scan may oftentimes be in fact normal and not show any aberrations. Obviously, if that nerve is significantly bowed forward, then the perioptic RNFL may pick up defects. But that's not really how we want to look at the optic nerve. We want to take radial scans, cross-section scans through the optic nerve so that we can see the neuroretinal rim at 180 degrees apart from each other and see what's happening deep inside and behind that at the level of the RPE and Brooks membrane. Now, in patients with optic disc drusen, 2 points to remember. Optic disc drusen eventually become calcified, and calcified optic disc drusen generally are relatively visible, especially if they are superficial. But if those disc drusen are buried, even if they're calcified, they're somewhat hard to see. We need to keep in mind that calcification doesn't really complete until the teen years. So younger individuals, 9, 10, 11 years old, who have swollen discs, who may in fact have disc drusen, those drusen are not yet going to be calcified. That's important because one of the highlights of fundus autofluorescence is that you can see calcified drusen. But in those patients who have buried disc drusen or who have disc drusen that are not calcified, again, we're going to use our OCT, we're going to take our radial scans, and there are a couple of differences between those scans and that which we see in papilledema. Number one, there's not going to be a deflection of the Brooks membrane RPE complex. So that very, very posterior, deeper OCT sections are going to have symmetric RPE segments on each side of the nerve. However, in disc drusen, invariably there will be loss of the optic cup, so we won't be able to see a defined optic cup. And in disc drusen, especially if they are calcified, this makes sense, we're going to see hyperfluorescence or hyper intense imaging on OCT where there is calcification. And beneath those areas of calcification, we're going to see areas of signal hypointensity. So in optic disc drusen, there are areas of hyperintensity and hypointensity. And the other piece that helps us to determine or distinguish between optic disc drusen and papilledema is the fact that the RPE tends to remain flat, but because we're jamming these hyaline bodies into the optic nerve, the neurosensory retina oftentimes will be separated just adjacent to the optic nerve from the underlying RPE. So we have this recumbent V pattern that we see in optic disc drusen that oftentimes we don't see in papilledema. Now, the finer nuances of optic disc edema, this is a 2-hour lecture and it involves neuroimaging, it involves anatomy, it involves clinical care. I wanted just to cover the basics here for you and give you some of the generalities and some of the more common differences between the OCT images that we're going to see in papilledema versus optic disc drusen. Remember, if we have optic disc drusen or we suspect optic disc drusen, shoot a fundus autofluorescence. See if anything lights up, because disc drusen will light up under fundus autofluorescence. If you have access to a B-scan, B-scan can also help to see and isolate optic disc drusen. You're going to see an elevated disc with a B-scan if you're looking at papilledema, but you're looking for those hyperreflective areas in optic disc drusen. In pediatric cases where there is suspected optic disc drusen, fluorescein angiography can play a role in differentiating these conditions. But it all boils down to, what are you going to do when you see this patient in clinic who has bilateral swollen discs? Can we call it papilledema? Only if there's increased intracranial pressure. We can call it a swollen disc or an edematous disc or disc edema of unknown etiology. But optic disc drusen, papilledema, very big difference in management. Hopefully this gave you a little bit of a primer on some of the more interesting findings that we'll see in OCT technology to differentiate these two conditions. Again, Jim Fanelli, CE in Italy, Tuscan discussion. Our CE educational programs are scheduled for later this year, 2021, and all throughout 2022. Hope you can make it. Check out our website, www.ceinitaly.com, and I'll see you again soon. Ciao!